Welcome to a deep dive into networking and security.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is, and it's so relevant,
Yeah.
these days with how much we rely on tech. You've given me some fascinating sources, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's a good mix. You've got certification prep materials like for the Google IT Support Professional Certificate, and then some real-world security assessments, which is great.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, to kind of bridge that gap, what you learn from a book and then what actually happens in the real world.
Right, exactly. And, there's some really interesting stuff in here. For example, did you know that your MAC address is kind of like a hardware fingerprint? We'll even get into how we can use that, like when we're working with test server a little bit later.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, yeah. And what I found mind-blowing is just the sheer number of possible MAC addresses. It's like 281 trillion, 474 billion, 976 million. 710,656,
Wow.
Yeah, talk about unique identifiers.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right. And speaking of things that can be a little mysterious, we're going to try to demystify DNS.
Ooh, good.
Yeah. You'll even learn how to troubleshoot it using a command called unslookup.
Okay.
Yeah. Remember those times when you get those website not found errors?
Oh, yeah.
We'll get to the bottom of those.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, okay, let's start building up our knowledge, starting with some network fundamentals. IP addresses, subnetting subnet masks.
Right, the basics.
Yeah, the building blocks of any network, really.
Yeah. Think of it this way. An IP address is like a street address, but on the internet for your device.
Right.
And then subnetting, it's like dividing a city into neighborhoods.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and the subnet mask basically helps devices figure out which neighborhood they belong to.
So they can communicate efficiently.
Exactly.
Okay. The Google IT Support Professional Cert excerpts really go into good detail on those.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, so it's not just about addresses, though. It's about how data actually moves through the network, right? When you send a packet of information, it goes through this whole journey.
Yeah. Like from your MSC address, look up to a TTL check, which is time to live,
Oh, okay.
and then port assignments. Like every step of the way, there's something happening.
So even something as simple as me clicking a link involves all this complex routing behind the scenes.
That's exactly it.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and each of those steps is ensuring that the data gets to where it needs to go.
Securely and efficiently.
Hopefully both.
Right, and so that's where DNS comes in.
Yes,
It's like the internet's directory service.
it is. You could think of it as a phone book
Okay,
for the internet.
got it.
There are actually 5 types of DNS servers.
Yeah.
You have a recursive server, then a caching server, then a root server, then a TLD server, and then an authoritative name server.
Wow.
Yeah. There are a lot of moving parts.
A lot of different servers working together.
Uh-huh. And then the concept of TTL. You ever heard of that? It's time to live.
Ugh.
And basically, that determines how long a DNS record is cached.
So that can be a really important factor for how quickly changes to DNS records are reflected across the internet.
Okay, so we're going to see that in action later when we use nslookup.
We will.
But first, let's talk about how we even connect to the internet in the first place. Your sources cover broadband technologies, like you've got T-Carrier and DSL and fiber,
Right.
and they all have their pros and cons. And it's interesting to see how they've kind of evolved over time to provide, faster speeds and greater bandwidth, because the way that we use the internet now.
Right, we're demanding more and more.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally different than it used to be.
Right.
And then there's this whole rise of cloud computing, Like you look at services like Gmail or Office 365.
We use those every day.
Yeah, and we don't even think about it, but that shift has really had implications for network architecture and security, hasn't it?
For sure. I mean, it's not just about connecting individuals to the internet anymore. It's about securing access to data and applications that live in the cloud.
Right.
Which is where VPNs come in.
Right.
Oh, right, VPNs.
Yes, they help create these secure tunnels for our data.
Which is really important, especially when we're working remotely.
Or accessing sensitive information.
Right. So it seems like security is becoming more and more important in our increasingly connected world.
It is.
But before we jump into that too deeply, let's talk about something that can make our lives a lot easier, which is the command line. Right? Both Linux and Windows have their own sets of commands for navigating and manipulating files. And, mastering these commands can be a real time saver for IT professionals.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
imagine being able to automate repetitive tasks or find specific files in seconds or quickly analyze system logs. You can do all of that and more using the command line.
Yeah, and your sources provide some good examples. Like you've got L's and CD and ARM.
Those are kind of like the bread and butter.
Yeah, exactly. But let's go beyond the basics. We can actually string those commands together using pipes to do some really powerful things.
Oh, yeah. Like L's law, etc. grep Bluetooth. That's going to show us all the files in the etc. directory that contain the word Bluetooth.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So we're not just learning individual commands, we're learning how to combine them.
Exactly. To solve problems.
To solve real-world problems. That's great. And then there are what are called regular expressions.
Yeah.
And these are like a super-powered search function, right?
Yeah.
They allow you to find specific patterns in text.
Right.
And that can be really useful for IT professionals.
That's a skill that can really set you apart.
Okay, sounds like something I need to add to my to-learn list.
You do.
Okay. Let's talk about managing users and computers within a network.
Okay.
Windows domains and Active Directory. Those are the big players here, right?
They are.
So Active Directory, or AD, is basically at the heart of many enterprise networks.
It is. It's all about centralizing control over users and computers and permissions.
Right.
You know, who can access what?
So instead of managing each computer individually, you can control everything from one central location.
Exactly. It saves a lot of time and hassle.
Okay. And your sources provide like a step-by-step walkthrough of how to set up a new user, manage groups, and even configure policies.
Yeah.
So that's great for people who are trying to learn this stuff.
For sure.
And then there's what's called group policy objects, or GPOs.
Yes. Those are like master settings that can be applied to an entire organization.
Okay. Like you could make sure everyone has the same desktop wallpaper.
You could. Or enforce security settings like password complexity.
Right. That sounds incredibly useful.
Oh, it is.
Especially for larger organizations.
Oh, it's a lifesaver.
Okay, so speaking of real-world problems, let's talk about troubleshooting. We've all been there, right? You're trying to visit a website and you get that dreaded website not found error.
Ugh, the worst.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. But it's important to remember that error messages are actually trying to help you.
They are?
Right. They give you clues about what's going wrong. And your sources guide us through diagnosing this very common issue using tools like ping and unslookup to verify DNS functionality.
Yeah.
And they actually provide a step-by-step process, which is really helpful for people.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's not just about knowing the commands, it's about understanding how to interpret the results, right?
Exactly. It all comes back to those core networking concepts.
Okay. So we've laid a solid foundation. Now let's dive into the exciting world of security.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, we'll start with some fundamental concepts. We'll look at the CIA triad, defense in depth, common attack vectors.
Right, laying the groundwork.
Yeah. So the CIA triad stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And these are really the cornerstones of information security, aren't they?
They are. They represent those goals that we're trying to achieve when we secure our systems or our networks.
Okay, and then there's the concept of defense in depth.
Right.
Which is all about having multiple layers of security.
It's like having a castle.
Oh, okay.
With a moat and walls and guards.
It makes it a lot harder to break in.
Much harder. So it's not enough to just rely on one single security measure.
Right.
We need to create this comprehensive defense strategy.
That covers all angles.
Right.
Okay. And then there's the concept of common attack vectors. So that would be things like social engineering and phishing.
Right. Social engineering, that's all about manipulating people to gain access to information.
Right.
And phishing is the type of social engineering that often uses like emails or websites that look legitimate.
Oh, so they're trying to trick people
Exactly.
into giving up their passwords or sensitive information.
Right. And your sources actually gave some really interesting examples of this, like spear phishing.
Oh, right.
Which is where attackers will actually tailor their attacks to a specific individual.
Wow.
Using personal information.
So that can be very effective.
Yeah, because it preys on our trust.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Like we think we know the person.
Right.
So we're more likely to click the link or open the attachment.
So it's not just about technology. It's about being aware of the human element.
It is.
Okay. Speaking of threats, let's talk about malware.
All right.
There's so many different types. Adware, ransomware, spyware, all designed to exploit vulnerabilities and cause damage.
Right.
So understanding how those work and what their impact can be is really crucial for putting the right security measures in place.
Yeah, we need to be able to recognize those signs of an infection so we can protect ourselves.
And then there are what are called man-in-the-middle attacks.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where attackers will try to intercept communication
Right.
between two parties.
Without them knowing.
Right. So it's like somebody secretly listening in on your phone call.
Yeah, it is. And techniques like rogue access points and evil twin attacks can be used to do this.
That they can potentially steal information that way.
They can?
That's scary.
It is.
And then there are denial of service or DOS attacks and DDoS attacks where attackers flood a network with traffic, making it unavailable to legitimate users.
Yeah. Right. So imagine a website crashing because it's getting bombarded with requests. That's a DOS attack.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And DDoS attacks are even worse.
Oh, right, because they come from multiple sources.
Exactly. It's like being attacked by a swarm of bees instead of just one.
Okay, deep divers, buckle up because we're about to enter the world of encryption.
Ooh, my favorite.
We'll explore both symmetric and asymmetric encryption.
All right.
But first, let's take a quick break.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome back.
All right, so now that we've laid some of that groundwork, let's talk about how we can actually apply these concepts to a real-world scenario.
Okay, I like it.
Okay, so imagine you're working for a company that handles sensitive payment information.
Right.
What would be your top priorities in terms of security?
That's a great question.
Yeah, payment data is,
a prime target.
Yeah. So we need to be extra careful. I'm guessing industry standards like PCI DSS would come into play here.
Absolutely. The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, provides a really comprehensive framework for securing cardholder data.
Okay. So it covers a lot of ground.
It does.
Yeah.
Everything from network security to vulnerability management and access control.
Okay, so PCI DSS is our roadmap.
It is.
Where do we even begin?
Well, the first step is always to build and maintain a secure network.
Okay.
So that means implementing firewalls to control traffic, disabling any unnecessary services, using strong passwords and configurations.
Right.
It's all about establishing that solid security foundation.
The sources are pretty clear about not using those default passwords that come with vendor equipment.
Oh, yeah. Those are just an open invitation
Yeah.
for attackers.
Yeah.
Every password should be strong and unique, and we should be enforcing things like regular password changes and multi-factor authentication wherever possible.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So strong passwords and multi-factor authentication must-haves.
Absolutely.
What about protecting the cardholder data itself?
So PCI DSS really emphasizes encrypting that data both in storage and in transit. So that means protecting it at rest, on servers, on databases.
Right.
And also safeguarding it while it's moving across networks.
So even if a breach occurs and the data is stolen,
Right.
it's useless to the attackers without the encryption keys.
Exactly. It's like having a lock on your data vault.
Right. I like that.
Yeah. And we also shouldn't be keeping sensitive data any longer than we absolutely need to.
Right. Minimize data retention.
Exactly. Just limit that potential damage.
Okay, makes sense. It's about being responsible stewards of that information.
Right.
The sources also talk about vulnerability management. I'm guessing that means keeping systems patched and up to date.
That's a big part of it. Regularly scanning for vulnerabilities, installing those security patches promptly, using up-to-date antivirus software.
So you're proactively closing those security gaps.
Before attackers can exploit them.
Right. So it sounds like it's a constant game of cat and mouse.
In a way, it is.
Yeah.
Staying ahead of emerging threats is key.
Okay, so what's next on our PCI DSS checklist?
Implementing strong access controls.
Okay.
This is where we really need to make sure that only authorized individuals can access that sensitive cardholder data.
Okay, so think strong authentication mechanisms, the principle of least privilege, regularly reviewing and updating permissions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to make sure the right people have the right level of access to the right information.
More no less.
That's it.
Okay, and let's not forget about physical security, too.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. The sources remind us that we need to control access to server rooms and other critical infrastructure.
Right. Physical security is just as important as digital security.
Yeah, because a determined attacker could bypass all those digital defenses if they can just walk right in.
Exactly.
So that's a good reminder that security is more than just firewalls and passwords.
It is.
What else does PCI DSS address?
So the next thing they talk about is monitoring and testing networks.
Okay.
It's like giving your network a regular health checkup.
Oh, okay.
We need to be keeping a watchful eye out for any suspicious activity.
So think intrusion detection systems, regular vulnerability scans, reviewing logs for anything unusual.
That's it.
Okay. And it's not enough to just set up those defenses. We need to make sure that they're actually working, too.
We do.
So regular testing.
It's like a fire drill for your network.
Okay, I like that. Makes sense. What's the last item on the PCI DSS agenda?
Maintaining a comprehensive information security policy.
Okay.
So it's not just about technology.
Right.
It's about having clear procedures and guidelines for handling sensitive information.
So everybody in the organization, not just the IT team, needs to understand their role.
Everyone. A strong security culture is built on shared responsibility and awareness.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. PCI DSS seems to cover a lot of ground.
It really does.
But even with the best technical safeguards in place, we can't forget about the human element.
No, we can't.
Right. What about those social engineering attacks, like phishing, that target people rather than systems?
Those are a huge concern.
Yeah.
Phishing attacks really prey on human psychology and trust, often tricking people into revealing sensitive information.
Yeah.
You know, attackers can be very clever in crafting emails or websites that appear legitimate.
Right.
And it can be very easy to fall for these scams.
So it's not just about spotting suspicious emails, it's about being cautious with any request for sensitive information.
Even if it seems to be coming from a trusted source.
Right. Always verify.
Yes. Always verify.
If something seems off, report it.
Yeah, it's best to err on the side of caution.
Good advice. Okay. So let's say the worst happens. A security incident occurs.
Okay.
What steps should an organization take to minimize the damage and recover quickly?
Having a well-defined incident response plan is crucial.
Okay.
It basically outlines those steps to take in case of a breach.
Okay.
Helping to contain the damage and get things back to normal as quickly as possible.
So the sources outline a series of steps, starting with identifying and containing the breach.
Right.
So the first priority is figuring out what happened, how it happened, and stopping it from spreading further.
That's right. Containment might involve isolating affected systems, disabling compromised accounts, or patching vulnerabilities that were exploited.
Yeah.
The goal is to limit the impact of the breach.
Okay. And then there's what's called eradication.
Right.
Which is about getting rid of the malware or kicking out the attacker from the systems.
Right. That could involve using antivirus software or restoring from backups or even completely rebuilding infected systems.
Okay.
It really depends on the nature and severity of the breach.
Okay. So once we've eradicated the threat, the next step is recovery. This is where backups become crucial.
Absolutely.
Restoring the data and systems to their pre-breach state.
Regular backups are a must-have. They can be a lifesaver in these situations.
The sources also emphasize the importance of testing those backups regularly.
Yes.
Because it's not enough to just have them. You need to make sure they're actually working.
Right. And that you can actually restore the data from them when you need to.
Right. So we've contained the breach, eradicated the threat, recovered our systems. What's next?
The final and arguably most important step is the post-mortem analysis.
Okay.
This is where we review what happened. We try to understand the root cause of the breach.
Right.
And then we implement measures to hopefully prevent it from happening again.
Okay.
It's all about learning from our mistakes.
And the sources stress the importance of documenting that entire process.
Yes, documenting everything.
The timelines, the actions taken, the lessons learned.
Right. It's like creating a playbook.
Okay.
For dealing with security incidents.
And involving all the relevant stakeholders in that postmortem analysis.
Everyone. IT staff, management, even legal counsel if necessary.
So a collaborative approach.
Right.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
It seems like a successful security strategy involves a multifaceted approach, right?
It does.
Encompassing technology, processes, and people.
Absolutely. It's a never-ending battle, but with a solid understanding of the principles and best practices, we can effectively mitigate those risks and protect our organizations.
Okay. Deep divers. We've given you a lot to think about.
We have.
Let's shift our focus now to securing specific types of systems and applications.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about securing those workhorses of the internet, web servers.
All right.
They're responsible for hosting websites and web applications, so they're often a prime target for attackers.
Oh, they are.
So where do we even begin with web server security?
Well, like anything else, it starts at the foundation.
Okay.
Choosing a secure operating system,
Right.
a secure web server software, and then hardening the server.
Okay.
So that means disabling any unnecessary services, applying those security patches, diligently, using strong and unique passwords.
Right, the basics.
The basics. But, we have to reiterate those because they're so important.
It's like building a fortress around your server.
Exactly.
But even with a strong fortress, you still need vigilant guards, right? What about protecting the web applications themselves?
Right.
I'm seeing a lot in the sources about input validation,
Input validation is critical.
Okay.
It's like having a strict doorman at your web application's entrance.
Okay.
Carefully checking all the data that's received from users.
Right.
Making sure it meets specific criteria.
So it's not just about keeping the bad guys out. It's about making sure they can't slip anything harmful through the cracks.
Exactly.
Okay. The sources also talk about output encoding.
Yeah.
What role does that play in security?
Output encoding is all about making sure that any data sent from the server to the user's browser is properly sanitized.
Okay.
Making sure that anything leaving the fortress
Right.
is written in a code that only authorized parties can understand.
Got it. And that helps prevent what's called cross-site scripting attacks?
Yes, or XSS.
Right.
Right? So an XSS attack could allow attackers to steal cookies, hijack user sessions, redirect users to malicious websites.
So they're tricking the user's browser into doing something it shouldn't.
Exactly.
So input validation and output encoding.
Essential for web application security.
Are there any other common vulnerabilities that we should be aware of?
Definitely. SQL injection.
Okay.
That's a big one.
What is that?
It targets web applications that interact with databases.
Okay.
So attackers try to manipulate database queries to gain unauthorized access to sensitive data or even modify the data.
So it's like finding a secret back door into the database.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
How do we prevent that?
Well, the best defense against SQL injection is using parameterized queries.
Okay.
This technique basically separates data from commands,
Okay.
making it much harder for attackers to manipulate the database.
And continuing to apply that rigorous input validation.
Always.
Okay. So it's a combination of smart coding practices and careful handling of that user input.
Right.
Is there anything else that attackers try to exploit?
We need to be aware of cross-site request forgery, or CSRF.
Okay.
It's a little bit more subtle than SQL injection.
Okay.
The attacker will trick a user into performing an action they didn't intend to do.
Oh, so like clicking a link that secretly submits a request to change their email address?
Or make an unauthorized purchase.
Right.
Exactly.
How do we protect against that?
We can protect against CSRF with anti-CSRF tokens.
Okay.
These are unique, unpredictable tokens that are included with each request.
Okay.
So that verifies that the request actually came from the user
Right.
and not an attacker.
Got it. And good session management is essential too.
Yes.
Okay, so securing web servers and applications requires that multi-layered approach. What about databases themselves, though?
Yeah.
They hold so much sensitive information.
They do.
It seems like they'd be a prime target.
They are a prime target.
So database security.
Paramount.
Okay.
It involves a combination of access controls, encryption, and auditing.
The sources recommend using strong passwords for database accounts,
Yes.
limiting access to only authorized users,
Of course.
and encrypting sensitive data.
Right, the usual suspects.
Right.
But they're worth repeating because even small lapses in database security can have huge consequences.
And regular database backups are essential.
Absolutely.
Okay, and testing those restore procedures.
Oh, that too.
Make sure you can actually recover the data.
Right.
And then there's auditing.
Yes.
Auditing database activity can help detect suspicious actions or unauthorized access attempts.
Right. It's like having a security camera for your data.
I like that.
Yeah.
So it seems like security really boils down to a few key principles.
Right.
Limiting access,
Right.
protecting data,
Yes.
and keeping a close eye on everything.
That's it.
And those principles apply whether we're talking about web servers or databases or any other type of system.
Any system.
Well, we've covered so much ground in our deep dive into networking and security.
We have.
Each system and application has its own unique security considerations.
It does.
It's a fascinating field.
It is.
But attackers are always coming up with new ways to exploit vulnerabilities.
Always trying to stay one step ahead.
So we need to constantly be learning and adapting.
We do.
It's been a whirlwind tour, but I feel like we've gained a solid understanding of the key concepts,
Me too.
the techniques that underpin a secure network.
And I hope our listeners feel empowered to take this knowledge and apply it to their own environments.
Absolutely. Security is an ongoing journey, but it's a journey worth taking.
It is.
By understanding the fundamentals, being aware of the risks, and implementing the right safeguards, we can create a more secure and trustworthy digital world.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and engaging.
And remember, security is everyone's responsibility.
It is.
Stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay secure.